Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and facing expulsion from the top 8 for the first time since 2020, the Demons dominated the Saints and reclaimed their rightful spot in the top 4. Joining me tonight to dissect our heavenly win over the Saints is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Binman. Good evening to all our listeners. Well, that was a great turnaround from the previous week. The question that we'll try and sort out tonight is, are the Saints really, really bad, or were they made to look that way by the Demons?
Well, without bursting anyone's bubbles about the win, I think they're really, really, really bad, or just really, really badly coached. And joining us tonight to talk about that and also to unpack and analyse all the stats from yesterday's match is B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. I don't know how bad they are, but I wouldn't want to be a Saints fan. I mean, It reminds me actually of the way Roos coached when he first came to the D's, with sort of focusing on minimising losses. But surely the Saints, I mean, they made the finals last year. But the good thing remember, it's not a litmus test, so it doesn't matter. We got the 4 points and 5 percentage points, and that's what the home and away season. But yeah, very frustrating if you're a Saints fan, and we'll get into it in the match. But it's really important, I think, to remember the approach that Lyon takes to football, and in particular at the moment, because they flood back in that second quarter. They were flooding back so hard. They'd often had 2-3 extras behind the ball, or at least in their defensive arc. I just can't see that that's a winning model in terms of, they just don't score enough. Freo are very similar in some respects, although they use their hands a fair bit more. But they were pretty poor, weren't they?
The difference is Paul Roos, when he came to the D's, we were trying to teach ourselves defence and minimising losses. That's not their goal. They're not in a rebuild stage, so to speak. So I don't know what's going on.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like, I can understand why Roosie took that approach, but it was still frustrating to watch, obviously, as a D's fan. Yes, but obviously. It was really about stemming the bleeding and not getting thumped. But surely, as I said, the Saints made finals last year. Surely it's time for them to progress to the next stage. But
it's frustrating for different reasons. I've got a 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗁 who is just ropeable, and he was so happy Ross Lyon was coming back, and not anymore.
I've got a real soft spot for the Saints, because in the 70s, particularly the late 70s, there were two clubs that felt like sort of kindred spirits, which were fans, were Saints and Fitzroy. And, the Saints were a bit like they had Barker and Lockett, and, a bit like we had Flower and our champions. And I remember one of my most eye-opening experiences going to the footy was by myself, going down to Moorabbin, and happened to stand in whatever it was called, the animal closure or whatever, when I was 12 or something. It was quite an eye-opener down there, and I think Lockett kicked 13 that day from memory. But, it would be very frustrating to be a Saints fan, because they just... Well, they weren't getting the ball forward. They weren't getting territory, and they just weren't looking like a scoring threat. And the talk about King, I mean, I wouldn't be looking at either King brother at the moment, but he's so far behind his brother, the Saints King.
It's a real pity for the Saints fans. I was like, if anybody has the chance to look at the vision of, for example, all the goals today on the Melbourne site, you look at the St Kilda cheer squad behind the goals, and there's lucky if there's a dozen people there. It's it's really
them.
It's really given up. Really sad to watch, but not surprising when I think their average scoring this year has been 55 points. You're just not going to win games like that.
No. And the problem is, it's a bit similar to the Freo, is that if you play a model where it relies on defending, like people talk about our attack, but it's just it's a myth. Melbourne score, heavily enough, and we've been in the top 2 or 3 scoring sides, 4 points in the last 3 years, and we're not at the moment, but we're certainly a much more offensive team. And if you get down 2 or 3 goals with their model, same with Freo, you wonder where the goals are going to come from.
Yeah, I think when you say myth, it was more. I think it's more because we get so many looks into inside 50, and it's not that we can't score things, like 70, 80, 90 to 100. It's just because of the amount we go in, maybe we should be getting 120, 130.
Well, yeah, I mean, we go back over
that's what I'm thinking. That I think we're a bit wasteful, but it doesn't matter.
Seasons. But the fact remains is that we're in the top 4 points. So
it is a bit of a myth. All right, well, let's get moved on because we've got a lot to talk about tonight. So each week I do put a call out to our loyal listeners to help us out and leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback. We do reward our loyal listeners who take the time to provide these 5-star reviews by giving them a shout out on the show. And 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀, he writes, what a wonderful way to regroup after a disappointing game. And that was referring to the Eagles' loss. And home in bed with COVID. You guys are true champions. The insightful, positive comments and analysis provided by the one and only B-Man puts belief back in my love for the D's. George, as ever, you tell it as it is. While the pessimist Andy, you and I have the same name, except I've been suffering pessimism for 58 years. They do my head in, keep up the great work and provide the quality material. Go D's. Well, thanks for that great review, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀. It's very much appreciated. Keep that feedback coming. We'll give you a shout out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter and you want to leave us feedback or post a comment or a question for the show, you can head on over to our podcast post that we post each week, or you can slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. We are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, any of your preferred podcasting apps. And we're also available on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. If you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been to our great forum, head on over to demonland.com. You can sign up. It's all free. You can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we are going to talk about, give us a call on 039016 3666, 039016 3666. As always, I'll answer, I'll put you on mute, I'll bring you on when there is a break in the conversation. And during the week, give that number a call, leave us a message and we'll play it on the show. So if you're listening live, come join us in the chat room, demonland.com/podcast. We'll try to be more attentive to the comments and questions posted there. We are live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights and listen to us live at 8:30 p.m. Match overview. Let's get straight into it. On a crisp Sunday afternoon at the MCG, the Melbourne Demons stormed back into the top 4 with a decisive 38-point victory over the Saints. Captain Max Gawn put on a masterclass as the D's dismantled the Saints in front of a paltry crowd of 37,403 people. Pre-game, the Demon fans were in despair as rumours swirled about the fitness of skipper Max Gawn, who was undergoing a last-minute fitness test on a troublesome calf. The side of the giant ruckman with heavy strapping had fans in tears and commentators speculating about a potential late withdrawal. However, Gawn, true to his reputation as AFL's Mr. Indestructible, not only took the field but delivered one of the most dominant performances of the season. The match began with St Kilda drawing first blood through young gun Mitch Owens, but any hopes of a Saints upset were quickly dashed. Melbourne responded with a barrage of goals, starting with Jacob van Rooyen and followed by Lachie Hunter and Jack Viney and Bailey Fritsch. And by the first break, the Demons had surged ahead as fans were lamenting the D's inaccuracy and ruining not putting the game to bed early. The D's showcased some impressive ball movement and dominance inside 50, which stood at 22-8 in their favour. The Saints showed some fight in the second quarter, and 2 late goals saw the margin whittled to 12 points at the main break. And after the main break, Max Gawn reasserted his dominance. A towering contested mark and a goal set the tone for the quarter. Melbourne's midfield, led by Gawn's silver service, capitalised on their opportunities. Quick goals from Van Rooyen, Petrarca and Chandler stretched the lead, and by the end of the third term, the D's had effectively sealed the game, leading by 41 points. And the final quarter saw Melbourne flex their muscles further. Petrarca and Stephen May added early goals. The Saints managed to kick 3 late junk time goals to narrow the margin. However, it was way too little, way too late, as the emphatic win propelled the Demons back into the top 4. Gentlemen, any other quick words? Start with you, George.
Nothing much more to add to that. don't have much time for Ross Lyon and the way that he's running this mob, but that's their worry. We'll talk about the 𝗍𝗃 game later on, but I was amazed to see in that game the number of what I would call quality players playing for Sandringham this week, who've recently played for St Kilda. And
why can't Tim Membry get a game?
Well, I don't know. I predicted last week he kicked 5.
Yeah, because he kills
He kicked 6. But for Sandringham instead of instead of the Saints, but they had Zach Jones, Cordy, Membry, Hunter Clark, Crouch, and Philippou all playing down.
They dropped Philippou for this. And they could have used him.
Yeah, but Ben Binman's right about King. He is not a full forward. He can't kick. He got 2 goals in this game, pretty easy. So he's not a great full forward. Surely you'd have Membry in there as well as a backup to him, providing something. But they don't. So I don't know what's going on down there. And like I said, that's their problem, not ours. But they were pretty pathetic.
Yeah, I had no idea that Membry wasn't playing, and so I said to my St Kilda mate the night before, "Happy Tim Membry Day Eve." It's just a joke that we have because he always has a day out against us, and he goes, "He's not playing," and I go, "Yes."
Yeah, amazing.
I said, as I said last week, I stupidly scheduled a family lunch on Sunday. Can't read, obviously, 2 months ahead. So had to watch the game as live on replay. And I wrote on Demonland that it was a great win. And just looking at the data, actually, it was interesting before the show. The stats probably downgrade that to a solid win from great win. It certainly wasn't up there with the Port win. But one of the things that I think that is really worth flagging or putting on the table at this stage is that we're up to almost what, certainly 2-3 years ago was the halfway point of the season. So we've played 11 games and, the ladder doesn't lie. That's a big enough sample size. We've had this discussion the last 3 seasons at this point of the year for all of the doomsayers about where we're at and all of the, the Eeyores who are, wringing their hands at how hopeless the Ds are. We're 4th on the ladder, have played 11 games, and we're close to, as I say, the halfway point of the season. And I think it's really important to remember that the toughest part of our year in terms of scheduling and the games we've played behind us. So, we've got some tough games coming up. We've got Collingwood twice, Fremantle twice. We play GWS, Port, Bombers, Brisbane and Brisbane, Gold Coast on the Gold Coast, and Dogs at Marvel. And we've still got 4 more interstate trips. It's a pretty tough run home. I'm not saying it's not a tough run home, but it's certainly not as tough as what we've had in the first 11 games. It's countering those games that we've got coming up. We've got games against the Eagles and Roos at the G to come. So you'd hope we'd win them, but we'll see.
The Eagles, I thought we'd win last time.
So that now next 12 games just isn't as tough though. So we've got in our first 11 games, we had 2 5-day breaks, a 6-day break, 4 interstate games, both Adelaide teams at home. We played the Swans, Port, Cats and Blues, meaning 4 of our 11 games have been against teams currently in the top 8. 2 of our games have been against teams currently in the top 4 as of the ladder at the moment, and we're 4th. For everyone but the Bombers, the ladder doesn't lie. And so, with that, you can't magic up 4th on the ladder. It's not like you can just luck your way into, unless you're the Bombers. But with that sort of schedule and that sort of fixture that we've had, it's not luck that we're 4th on the ladder. And so I think it's a really good indicator of where we're at. And as Goody is at pains of saying, we're nowhere near playing our best footy. So for me, it's a real positive, a real upside, that whole dialogue that Goody's been talking about, the messaging there, and I've heard multiple players say it now. The theme is we want to be peaking at the right time. We want to be playing our best football at the right time. The teams that improve the most, as Goody keeps saying, are the ones that contend. And there's a really interesting point of comparison this year, and that's the Swans. The Swans last year were 15th or something after round I think around 11 or 12 or 13. So they came home with a wet sail. This year they're going brilliantly, but they've barely had an injury. I mean, they had some injuries coming into the season, but they've had the least number of changes of any club so far. So, we'll see how they go maintaining that level of excellence, because that's been us in the previous 2 years, hasn't it? At this stage in 23 and 22, what were we, 10-1 in 22 and maybe 9-2 or something last year?
Yeah,
something like
that's
that.
correct, yeah.
And we know what happened. We sort of had some bad luck, and certainly we were in the war zones in 22, and then we didn't get it done in 23. So, it's us and the Swans are a really interesting comparison about where we're at. But 7-4, fourth on the ladder, as I say, that doesn't happen by happenstance. So, we're in a good position, I think, nearing our halfway point of the season.
All right, and with that, Ben, you want to get on to your stats files?
Indeed. So it was a really interesting game for a range of reasons. We definitely tried to sort of get back to that turnover game that I've been talking about in the 2024 Red and Blueprint. I didn't watch I just watched it from the start of the game, but they referred on the commentary, on the Fox commentary, that they had interviewed Goody. I don't know if you guys heard it or have seen the replay, but it sounded as if scoring from turnover was a real emphasis from Goody, because the Kelly Underwood and I think it was Brad Johnson mentioned it a couple of times that Goody had said that, and they mentioned it during the call as well. So they clearly had a focus on that aspect of the game. So looking through our Red and Blueprint, defence, contest, transition, back half football, scores from turnover, and the last one, fitness, which I'll touch on as well this week, and on-watch clearances. They're always in the mix, but I just don't think they're as significant as they have been for us in previous years, and certainly not as significant across the board in the AFL. So speaking of the Swans, they're around 14th or 15th from scores from clearances. So sort of it's a good indication of the significance of clearances vis-a-vis turnovers. Opposition score, I reckon Goody would have been really frustrated to give up those late 3 goals, probably not as frustrated as Steve May looked and the defensive back 6 looked, but, it's still a very strong, terrific defensive performance, with one possible exception, and I'll talk about this when I get to it, but scores from turnover that was a really interesting, that was a high number, so I'll get to that. But I think we were flattered a little bit in this game in terms of our defensive effort. And again, I'll touch on that with the turnovers. Intercepts, last week we were down 9 for intercepts. We were down 9 for intercept marks. We turned that around completely this week, and Tomo had a great game. I wonder has he ever got coaches' votes at the D's before? Maybe a couple of times. Do you recall him ever getting coaches' votes? But he got 5 this week and deserve it too, I thought. So in intercepts, 80 to 66 this week. So we had 20 more intercepts than we did last week against the Eagles. We were plus 14. And what's interesting, the Saints managed 66 intercepts. To put that into context for last week's games, the Eagles only managed 3 more than that, 69, but we were plus 14 for intercepts. We're down minus 9 last week for intercept marks. This week we were plus 6. We took 19. We only took 10 intercept marks last week. We almost doubled that this week. We took 19 intercept marks, and that was obviously a huge factor in the game. Another big factor was our marks inside 50. I was a bit surprised they took this many, actually. It was 15-12. So plus 3 for contested marks. For marks inside 50. So the next one, the contested possessions. Last week, 123 each. So we're dead even for contested possessions. This week, it was 129, 123. So interestingly, I was a bit surprised with this. I thought we would have won that by quite a margin, but plus 6 isn't a massive number. And I mean, I wonder how many they got in the second quarter. So their effort was reasonable, and that's a lot of. They would have been the Saints would have been relatively happy with that 129, 123. It's as many contested possessions as the Eagles managed against us last week. Last week I mentioned that Willow in the stats file on Demonland's added some new data, and it's really interesting, the contested possessions broken down in more detail. I mentioned last week that there's 3 categories: hard ball get, loose ball get, and other. And other includes contested marks, free kicks, contested knock-ons, gathers from hit-outs, and ruck ball gets. And just a comment about they're all possessions. So people seem to conflate often possessions and disposals. They're two different things. A free kick, contested knock-on, gathers from hit-outs, ruck hard ball gets, for instance, are all possessions. They're not disposals. The disposal is a handball or a kick. So that category of possessions. Last week in our forward 50, we were down 3 for that category. We were down 10 for that category in post clearance. This week, however, we were in our defensive 50, we were +4. We were in post clearance, we were +13 for that category. So again, that is marks, contested marks, free kicks, contested knock-ons, gathers from hit-outs, and ruck hard ball gets. Post clearance, and this is critical. So last week we were we were down 10 for that category in post clearance, and so that's when the clearance is won. The next possession after that clearance, we were down 10 for those, and that goes to our effort level last week, and how up we were for the game, if you like. This week we were +13 for that number, so massive turnaround for that. That was a big factor in the game, winning those post clearances and marking free kicks and those things. So more than twice as many of that sort of possessions post clearance than last week. It was 19, so 35 this week. It was 18 last week, 16 last week. So more than double of those sorts of contested possessions, post clearance contested possessions. Pressure last week at match, our average for the match was 184 to 189. It was a different game this week, and it was a much lower pressure game. We only had one quarter where we neared the elite level, which was the third quarter, and that's the quarter, of course, where we broke the game open. It was 192 to 157 in that quarter, and really that was the game. That was a terrible second half by the Saints from pressure. So they went 180, 155, 157, and they finished off with 146. So that's a 146 for a game. I think we've had one or two quarters like that all season where we've been 146, and we were 167 in the last quarter. So 174 to 160. This week, the top 7, I picked the top 7 for a reason this week. So our top 7 pressure players. Number 1 was Clayton Oliver. He averages 45.2 points per game. This week he had 31 pressure acts for 62 pressure points. That's just brilliant. So well and truly above his average, which is already high. That's right up there in our top 10 or top 5 pressure players this season, Clary. Nibbler again, another fantastic performance, 53.8 pressure points he averages a week, and he was 61 this week. Jack Viney, he's Mr. Pressure. He averages an incredible 62.7 pressure points per game this season. It's just phenomenal, really. I suspect that's number 1 in the AFL. If not, it would be top 5. But he was right up there this week, so 59 pressure points, 25 individual pressure acts. Tommy Sparrow, right on his season average. He had 47. His season average is 48.9. Kay Chandler, 46 pressure points. His season average is 49. 𝗍𝗲, just a tick over his season average, 46. And the 7th one is important, and just sort of put a pin in this for later in terms of the questions about Shane McAdam. He had 33 pressure points. He averages 27.5. So that he came in 7th for us in terms of most pressure. One of the interesting things, the reason why I included 7 was 3 of that top 7, 4 if you include Nibbler, although he played a fair bit of time on ball. 4 of that top 7 are forwards in terms of pressure players, and that was complete opposite to last week. As suggested by this figure, our tackles inside 50 last week were woeful. We were down 13. They had 22. We could only manage 9 tackles inside 50 this week. So I'll repeat that, 9. This week we had only the 2 more. We had 11, but they could only manage 4. So we went from down 13 last week to +7 in this category. Our tackles overall were 44 to 41, so only +3 for that. This is a really interesting number. We keep coming back, and I'm sure I'm sort of increasingly sort of confident this is a function of our game plan, the shift in our game plan. Ground ball gets last week were 82 to 84. We were down 2. This week we were -21 for ground ball gets, which was crazy. There's another stat that in the data that I was mentioning before about the contested possessions, that includes loose ball gets. And we were way down on loose ball gets this week as well. So loose ball gets inside forward 50 were down 8, loose ball gets post clearance down 2, loose ball gets inside forward 50. That was last week, was minus 14. Post clearance, our loose ball gets were down 19 this week, and I suspect a big part of that was because of what I mentioned before with line flooding. So we're often, they had 2 extras in the defensive area or post clearance, if you like. So it sort of stands to reason that we would lose a lot of those ground balls or those loose balls because they had extra players at the contest. But it's an interesting one because we've been number 1 in that ground ball gets sort of the previous 3-4 years, or up in the top 3 or 4, and we're getting smashed regularly for ground ball gets and loose ball gets now. Ground ball gets, as I said, down 21. Clearances were really interesting again with this conversation about the sort of value of the midfield and the role of clearances in the game as it stands in 24. Centre clearances last week we were 13 to 15, down 2 in raw totals. This is plus 7 for stoppage clearance. This week for centre clearances we were plus 5, 14 to 9 from winning. We won 14 centre clearances. They won 9. But they beat us the opposite to our stoppage clearances. They actually beat us around the ground. Stoppage clearances 20 to 22. So we were down 2. They bring an extra. I'm pretty sure they brought an extra to the stoppage, as most teams do, or we have one less at the stoppage. But nonetheless, they were only plus 3 up. So we had, on just raw totals, we had a better week last week in terms of our clearance numbers. Contested marks last week was a big factor in the loss. We talked about that last week. We were down 8, 7 to 15. We flipped that around completely this week, and it was plus 8, 16 to 8. And it was a big factor for the Eagles in their win against us last week. This was a big factor, I think, in our win this week, clunking 16 marks. That's a big improvement from last week, 7. Transition from back half's really interesting. Turnovers. Well, last week we really struggled. We could only score 14 points from the back half, and 32 they scored. On turnover last week, that manifested in getting smashed on turnover, 18-14 to 11-4-70. So we were down 56 points last week. This week, this was one of the curious things and this is what I was referring to before, this number won't really impress 𝗟𝗋, I don't think. They scored 8-6-54 on turnover against us. We scored 8-10-58. We only scored 4 more points, as well as we did on turnover. The differential was only 4 points. The Eagles only scored 16 more points than the Saints did on turnover. And in fact, the Saints actually only had 1 less scoring shot from turnover in total. That, as I say, won't really thrill 𝗟𝗋, I wouldn't think, a huge amount. That's a lot, like 54 points from turnover, considering they scored 66 points. That's a ridiculous amount of turnover as a percentage of their score. It's like 80% of their score. So I don't know that 𝗟𝗋 would want to see a number like that, particularly after the previous week giving up 70, and that was the asterisk I put on the defensive work. Maybe that's partly to do with how the ground was set up. Both defences were set so deep. We were pushing up higher, but they were just pushing way back. So that means there's a lot of space between the arcs. Now, finally, just the last one was, before I get to that, last week I mentioned one stat that I thought really killed us was our kicking efficiency, 58.4 to 74. Last week was woeful kicking performance. Much better this week. It was 70.2, our kicking efficiency, to their 60, so plus 10 this week after being down 15.7% last week. The time in forward half was interesting. It was 41.59 for the match. The last quarter, though, it was amazing number, 26%. We could only manage time in forward half to 74%. That's crazy. So, but where we did the damage was the third quarter. So it's interesting around this model of playing back half footy. When we got time in forward half working for us, it was 69-31, and that's when we did the damage on the scoreboard. So that's an interesting thing to sort of consider. That third quarter, though, was the way we like to roll. I'm just thinking Yeah, the quarter. The fitness is interesting. So just to put a pin on the discussion last week, I mentioned that, I think that fatigue was a factor last week. There was a discussion on Demonland which was interesting around, well, Goody was clearly angry and clearly frustrated with how we performed last week, and I agree. So wouldn't that contradict the sort of notion that fatigue might be a factor? And I think it's a really interesting discussion because, no, I don't think that holds true at all, and mainly because he would have expected them to push through that pain barrier. Basically, he was really frustrated that we lost. We were frustrated that we lost last week. Fatigue can be a factor, but it's not an excuse. It's like bad kicking. No one says. Everyone would agree Melbourne aren't a particularly good kicking side. Well, that's not an excuse, but it's a factor in how many turnovers we give and the games we lose, that's for sure. But he would have expected psychologically that they would have been able to push through that barrier more effectively than they did. And I suspect that's why Howes got dropped. Young player who maybe didn't, wasn't able to push through that barrier and sort of mentally be strong enough to get over the top of it. I think that's a big factor. That was a huge part of Burgess's philosophy of pushing through discomfort. And so was this sort of notion of psychologically, I've heard multiple players talk about their strong belief that the Demons are the fittest team in the AFL, and that's a Burgess thing. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀 has taken a very similar philosophy. Whether that's true or not, sort of a moot point. That's the psychology of it, and part of that would have been your ability as I've heard players say that they train harder than they play. So I think that psychology of being able to push through things is a really important philosophy of 𝗟𝗏 and is of ours. Just as I say, to put a pin on that discussion, Watson 11 put up some numbers. I'm just going to find it here. And I'll read directly from it. So he put up some numbers about the game last week, and I mentioned on the podcast last week about the using the trackers and looking at that. In particular, for me, I pointed out the average speed in defence, which means that the average speed when the opposition's got the footy. 4 of the top 5 last week were Eagles players. This week, all 5 of the top 5 players, and keeping in mind the Saints are about the best running team in the AFL. Well, at least that's what Lime wants to build them into, and that's their one wood, is really their ability to cover the ground. All 5 this week were back to Melbourne players being the average speed in defence. So, and Watson 11 posted sort of unpacking that a little bit more. Hate to feed Bin Man's monster, but after the pod, I checked the tracker and we were so far off in our work rate. This is the game against the Eagles. I'm putting this performance down to complacency, heat, team-wide flu, loading, or whatever reason we want to use. Below are some stats comparing our effort versus West Coast compared to our efforts versus the Cats. We were 25 to 30% down in work rate across every metric. The average speed with and without the ball was most interesting as it compares the average speed of every player in the team, which was what I was picking up before. We hardly ever get outworked, and when we don't have the ball, 7.1 kilometre per hour is easily our worst performance this year. The only other times we were outworked this season was against Brisbane, when we lost, of course, 7.4 to their 7.7. And, it was really just a terrible day in terms of our numbers. We only had 230 total sprints last week against West Coast. As way of comparison, against Geelong, we had 292 total sprints. That's 62 more sprints. We only covered 36 kilometres against West Coast at high speed. We covered 45 kilometres against Geelong at high speed. We only had 18 repeat sprints against West Coast compared to 35 against the Cats. And I mentioned the average speed with the ball, and the average speed without the ball was even more striking. Against the Cats, the average speed without the ball was 8.3 kilometres per hour. Against the West Coast, it was 7.1 kilometres per hour. And for me, that just speaks to that fatigue factor having a huge impact. I thought right from the get-go, we looked running on top of the ground. All of our numbers, if I did that same comparison, I might ask, what's an 11 if you happen to be listening? If you could do the same comparison for this game, we'd be smashing it out of the play. It'd be similar numbers to the Cats game. Again, keeping in mind, they're considered to be the best running side, one of the best running side. Perhaps the Swans are now better ones, but that was their one wood last year, was their running ability. So a good performance from the Ds, but there are a few things that Goody wouldn't have been thrilled about from the statistics. points, and the scores from turnover is a big one. We can't be giving up 50 points against the really good teams. Really, ironically, the reason we won that game is they could do nothing out of the clearance. Just one final stat, which was great. We finally scored a goal from a kick out. So we kicked 1 goal, 1 this week from a kick out. They didn't score any.
Fantastic. Didn't think you were going to make me relive the West Coast Eagles game, but here we are. You spoke about Adam Tomlinson and coaches' votes. I just did a quick search. He did receive, and I didn't do a deep dive, but he has received 1 coach's vote at least, and that was against the Saints in round 2 of 2021.
Saints are Bunny. Speaking of Bunny, just a question: have we broken the Cats completely? Like, they can't win after we beat them. Speaking of the Cats,
no, they've broken themselves. I'll talk about it later on, but they are in a world of pain because they have virtually no one missing from their list.
Well, and speaking of world of pain, I mean, the Saints pretty much had a full list to pick from, didn't they?
Yeah,
they don't have many injuries. Except
they left them all down at 𝗙cie instead.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into our listener questions. And the first one is from Smurf, who says, I thought Tomlinson was excellent today. Well, that was yesterday. In defence, sometimes he gets caught on the back foot one-on-one, but for the most part, he's slotted right back into the back 6/7. He'll obviously remain in the side while Lever is recovering from his knee injury, but where to from there for Tomo? And it was an impressive outing for Tomo in the seniors. 25 possessions, 12 intercepts, 7 marks, 6 spoils, and you've really got a feel for the guy because for the most part he is solid when he is recalled to the ones, and on a number of occasions, and we've noted that he has been stiff to be dropped. However, realistically, there are only 3 spots for big man in defence, and once Lever returns, he's, I guess, the 4th man out. So, George, where to from here for Tomo once we get back
Lever's out for another 3 weeks from the sounds of things. So Tomo's going to be in for another 3 weeks. Daniel Turner's not available as well. Tomo provided exactly what Tomo provides. He's a good tall interceptor. He's not great when the ball hits the ground. Certainly down at 𝗙cie, he's used to just marking somewhere in the centre-half back position and then delivering the ball. What I really thought was interesting was the way that Goody approached the absence of Lever and partially Howes was instead of Tomlinson delivering the ball, almost invariably they were looking for 𝗟𝗋𝗻. 𝗟𝗋𝗻 became the man who delivered the ball out of the defensive half all the time. There was this flow-on effect as a result of that. Because 𝗟𝗋𝗻's playing that true half-back role, he's not in the middle where we also have been trialling him. So Neal-Bullen goes into the middle more than what perhaps he has done so in the past because 𝗟𝗋𝗻's not in there. Because Neal-Bullen's in the middle, Langdon has to go to half forward to cover that hole. Who covers Langdon? Hunter comes into the side. So there was almost like 6 players were moved progressively around the ground to cover the loss of Lever. But what was interesting was it worked successfully. That was a really good move. 𝗟𝗋𝗻 was just fantastic, the way that he moved the ball. It changed the way we moved the ball out of defence as well. Previously, it was given in the hands of Rivers, for example, who'd bolt up the ground, deliver it 60 metres, get it into the attack. This was much more methodical because that's the way 𝗟𝗋𝗻 delivers the ball. It makes it more sense when you're playing against someone like St Kilda as well. They drop back so quickly, so getting the ball into other people's hands is critical to keep the ball moving up to the field until you're within the attacking zone. But yeah, Tomo was great. T-Mac was great. We'll talk about T-Mac a bit later on, but both of them getting intercept marks and contested intercept marks was critical to it. And with May as well, there was just no way that St Kilda, when their only forward was basically King and a little bit of Caminiti, they just didn't have the people who could out muscle, out mark, and outplay our back line.
Bean Man, anything you want to add to that before I move on to T-Mac?
No, other than just got to back over my stats. My numbers looked wrong. I told you I was in a rush, Andy. So I thought this didn't look right. Our time in forward half, that was last week that I was reading out. So in that third quarter, that was curious. So for the match, the time in forward half ended up 54-46, but our highest scoring quarter, in the quarter where we put the game to bed, and that's why it was a really good. That third quarter is a good one to watch for the red and blue print. It worked, right? So that's where it was really effective. So in that quarter, it was only 49-51 in that quarter, 51 their way. So they had more of the ball in their forward half than we did. In that first quarter was our big number, 68-32, and we, they were sort of rocking on their feet a bit. So that was a big factor. And then points from defensive half, which I didn't read out before, which is relevant for the same reason for the game plan. We scored 48 points from our defensive half this time, season average of 32. But again, this is the problem. This is a number that will worry Goody, is we only averaged 27.7 points from the defensive half that opposition score against us. This game against the Saints scored 50 of their points from the back half. Now, partly that's because of how hard they flood back, but still that's a lot. 50 of their 66 points came from the back half. As I say, partly that's to do with the way they set up and use what's his name, Bradley Hill, to run it off the halfback flank, and but still that's too high, I think.
Well, thank you for that Stats Files 2.0 for the evening. Mandalorian says, Tom McDonald was also excellent in defence today. He was clunking everything and took 9 marks for the match. His disposal has improved out of sight. He definitely made up for last week's effort. Granted, they all did from that lacklustre game. So T-Mac had some impressive stats for the game too. Only the 16 possessions, but he took 9 marks, 8 intercepts, 6 spoils. He went at 94% disposal efficiency. And just quickly, I'll add Stephen May's stats, 25 possessions, 11 intercepts, 6 marks, 3 spoils, and the 1 goal, which was his first since 2020. All 3 of our key defenders spent 100% of time on the ground. B-Man?
I just actually now thinking about what George said before about I watched about 2 minutes of that Sandringham game and thought, why is Membry playing down there? Now that I think about it, that was another weird thing about not selecting Membry, because the problem for T-Mac last week is I don't think he's great one-on-one. His go is to play that intercepting and to use his speed and to almost be a distributor, halfback flanker type. And he was able to do that without Membry. If you brought Membry into that side, someone would have had to stood him and someone would have had to have taken King, obviously. And Tomo is not really an interceptor. He said in an interview post-game, his go is one-on-one defending, and he did a good job. But they had an undersized forward line, didn't they? Even King, their tall, is pretty undersized, which played right into our hands without having a lever there. They could have created some problems for us if they brought in 2 bigs that forced Tommy Mack onto one of them. But he had a field day, partly because they didn't. He got coach's votes too, didn't he?
He got 4 from one of the coaches.
I thought he had a terrific game, but he continually seemed to be up against forwards that he was considerably taller than. So the thing I'm really loving about his game is his field kicking. He was we've talked about this, but he was always a good field kick. He just took on crazy risks and created turnovers. But he's kicking within himself. Those little darts he doesn't miss many of them, and he's always been a sort of confident player when he's up and about, but I love his sidestep. It's become a bit of a signature move for him to do that sidestep to create some space, and he's been a revelation down back. So, it's great for his career. It's amazing that he's been able to sort of be so flexible. I think last week was his sort of the only quiet game, or the only game where he was sort of performed under what he would the level he's been at. He had a fantastic game.
Well, let's not bury the lead here and talk about the incredible Captain Max Gawn. Red Jacket says, kudos to our magnificent Captain Max. He was just immense today. I must say that I was filled with trepidation when we heard pre-game that Max was out on the MCG doing an emergency fitness test because of a tight calf. If he had any niggle, he sure didn't play like he had any problems. He absolutely monstered the Saints. His 7th All-Australian jacket is within his grasp. Honestly, what would have happened if he didn't pass that fitness test? Fullerton was already replaced on the emergency list by Ben Brown, and by all reports, Brown was already playing at 𝗙𝗶𝗀𝗰 while Max was being assessed at the G. 𝗍𝗏 perhaps, or perhaps Petty in the ruck all day. We're in serious trouble if Max goes down. 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝗁 says, impressed with a close to four-quarter effort, which we have rarely done in recent years. All had good games, but wow, our captain is something else. And when all is said and done, he will be the greatest ruckman of all time. People don't like to call it on current day players, but once he's done and you read his CV, it's him. So Max was just sensational and did indeed put on a masterclass. We've witnessed so many of these masterclasses that the club, from Max, that the club really should be charging extra to witness this greatness that's in front of us. 27 possessions, 18 contested possessions, 10 clearances, 10 score involvements, 7 marks, 3 contested marks, 5 intercepts, 5 inside 50s, 34 hitouts, 8 hitouts to advantage, 3 tackles, a goal, 82% of game time on ground, and that was not bad from a guy that was minutes away from having his calf amputated on the middle of the MCG pre-game. George?
Yeah, like Red Jacket. Firstly, I was forced to watch in front of the television instead of at the ground, and I was filled with absolute trepidation when they showed on the screen Max with not just his rucking strapping on his left leg, but on his right leg was calf strapping, and then they showed him and Selwyn doing various exercises inside the rooms, testing out the calf, and I thought, oh God, here we go. Over 30 years of age, calf injury, he's gone, this is it, it's all over. And then he's come out and performed like he did on the ground. It was just incredible. We're going to look back at this in years to come, and to be able to say, like we do about players like Robbie Flower and Ron Barassi, we saw one of the greatest players ever to pull on the jumper for the Melbourne Football Club in action. He's just been remarkable. And I'm reminded by one of the Demonland posters who said it's just so amazing that he has had 5 All-Australian jackets, probably heading for 6. Number 6.
Oh, 6 heading for 7.
All-Australian. Yeah. So far ahead of everyone else.
And then you go back to where he started. You go, this was a guy who was caught smoking on the way to training. This was a guy who purportedly vomited over the top of Tom Scully, which in the end probably worked for us because it finished up giving us Jesse Hogan and ultimately Stephen May. So thank Max is
like the Kevin Bacon 1 degree of separation /
the best vomit, the best chunder of all time.
We can give Max credit for that as well. But yeah, he's certainly, it's very difficult to say this, but he's probably the best ruckman ever to appear at the Melbourne Football Club, and that includes Jim Steins. It's just a remarkable record. So over the all ruckman over all the years that the AFL's been operating, I think we're seeing the best player certainly as a ruck, but certainly one of the best players that will ever pull on the Melbourne Football jumper.
I 100% concur, and I don't even think we need to wait to the end of his career. Where he sits in the all-time ruckman, I've watched a lot of footy. The only one that I've seen come close to consistency of performance is probably Simon Madden, different type of ruckman. Cox, I think I tend to sort of down. I didn't say, maybe it's because of the West Coast factor, and maybe it didn't see him every week. So he's got a phenomenal record, but I can't think of a better player, a ruckman, in all the time I've watched footy. Certainly not at Melbourne. And all due respect to White and Steinsy, they're the two that probably come in behind, and he's unbelievable. And what I love about him is his improvement. And his kicking's improved out of sight. His field kicking is clever.
His kicking's great, yeah.
His aerobic fitness. Marshall is. I rate Marshall as probably him and English are on the next rung down behind. Marshall's a gun, and he made Marshall look like a VFL player.
Yeah.
Just physically worked him over, ran him up and down the ground. That goal he kicked where he close to goal, he worked so hard to get for that. And it was a beautiful kick, by the way, under pressure by Clary to get it to him. But it just had that. He was never going to drop it. And then was full confident that he was going to get it. I saw a stat somewhere along this week that of current day players, I get the sort of the specifics of it, from outside 50, he's going at something like 30% accuracy from outside 50. It puts him fifth on the list of all current players for goals from outside 50 who have had more than 20 shots or some such. I mean, that's phenomenal. For a player who's a ruckman. He got, how many clearances did you say he got in this game?
10, I think.
10, which was 10. The number one on the ground. He just had a field day tapping it down to, like, some of his clean hits were magnificent. Just awesome game, awesome player. I totally agree with what George said. He's right up there with just best player I've seen at Melbourne, full stop. Robbie's in a different conversation, but, I can't think of too many. Look at his consistency, how consistent he is. That's another game over 20 AFL ranking points. Like, I think there's probably last week he didn't get it, but almost I'd say 9 of his 11 games this year have been over 20, and 20 is considered an elite game of footy.
D-Minion says, despite the hard tag on Petrarca in the first half, the D's midfield showed signs of purring again. Track was fantastic in the second half. 𝗫anye continues to be a beast and remains so underrated that he will most likely be stiff once again when it comes to All-Australian. He's been so consistent this season. Clary is slowly finding his groove, and I'm positive he'll be back to his blistering best come finals. More midfield minutes for 𝗍𝗲 is really adding pace and dynamics to our centre bouncers, and 𝗟𝗯 was back to some of his outstanding best. That was an almost 2021 finals level performance. More of this, please. So it's much better performance from our mids, and I will just highlight 𝗟𝗯, who didn't play exclusively in the midfield, but his stats, before I get your thoughts, big man. 𝗟𝗯, he had 32 possession. It's only his 9th time ever to hit the 30 possession mark. He took 14 marks, 6 score involvements, 5 inside 50s. Big man, he sort of touched on 𝗟𝗯 a little bit, but he was sort of back to some of his best performances, particularly with all the injuries he's had.
Yeah, I think George noted him, but how important he was off the halfback in that shape, and I really loved. I mean, he didn't have any. In fact, the centre bounce attendances. It's a bit. I mean, this isn't just the midfield. It can be. You can think of it this way, but the mids obviously go to all of the other stoppages as well. But centre bounce attendances were interesting. 21, Max had the most. Clayton next. We're going to talk about him in a minute, or George will, I think. It's 𝗍𝗲. I was amazed at this number. I wouldn't have even guessed it. He also had 20 centre bounce attendances. Yeah. The next was Track was 16. Jack 𝗫anye had 13. Nibbler had his, I'm pretty sure this is a season high for centre bounce attendances for him. He had 41. Rui had 6, so he took 6 ruck contests, and Tommy Sparrow had 1, and 𝗟𝗯 didn't have any.
I will add for 𝗟𝗯, so he wasn't going in the centre bounces. No, he didn't have any
centre bounces, but he definitely came up to the contest, some stoppages, didn't he?
At the stoppages and the throw-ins, he doesn't come up right to it. He plays that sort of step or two. Remember I told you about how I went to training and they had a player sort of just off the centre bounce, sort of giving instructions, or not instructions, but sort of telling the guys there where the outer people, or that, how other teams bring in sort of an extra man into the thing, sort of just sort of alerting them to that. So that's what his role sort of playing that half.
As George said, he's so important. Like, his importance is underrated because he's had an average last season and he's struggled this season. He never got right last year in terms of exactly what you just said, Andy, but also the shape of, he's that kick. The kick that he makes sure hits a target from 20 metres that allows us to control the footy is so important, because if you don't, like we saw against the Eagles, we couldn't control the footy at any point. No. He's so important for that. But just picking up your point is our midfield hasn't been down. Like, it's the point I'm trying to make out. That's why I highlighted in the numbers. As the numbers hardly different from last week to this week. So they looked fantastic. It looked great when 𝗪𝗀 was hitting it down the throat of the opposition, but the numbers aren't much different to what they have been, to be honest. So For me, the wild card, and we'll talk about him in a sec, is having 𝗍𝗲 in there. That creates that point of difference that takes us from to another level of damage, I think. But the other one I just say is 𝗟𝗏 had you could not have a more interrupted preseason. He's not yet at full fitness. He's playing incredible standard of AFL football given the preseason he's had. It is like, people are saying he's not back at his best, but that's like saying the sun rises in the morning. Of course he isn't, because he didn't have a preseason. I think it is flat out extraordinary, the level of footy that bloke is playing given his limited preseason. And he was starting to look at his powerful best. There was a couple of bits of play which were pure 𝗟𝗏. And I think, his footy IQ is so good. He set up at least 2 or 3 goals just from his strength and his ability, like the one that I mentioned with Gawney marked. If you watch that replay, that goal, he kicks it he's tackled and he sort of gets it on an angle, but all he needs to do is get it to Max, and he was able to do it. 99 problems at the Ds, and the midfield ain't one of them.
All right, what have we got next? Yes, Red and Blue Beard says, thanks again for the podcast, guys, and I think we look a lot better with 𝗍𝗲 in the middle. Is that why we recruited McAdam? Will we see a time when track is forward and 𝗍𝗲 is in the middle permanently? Well, I'm loving 𝗍𝗲 in the guts. He really does add some dash and outside run and pace to our midfield, primarily at the centre bounces. Because he doesn't often, and after the centre bounce, he usually goes forward. George, we'll talk more in depth about McAdam's game shortly, but is this why we drafted McAdam, and can you see 𝗍𝗲 playing a more permanent role in the midfield?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by what is meant by permanent.
When I say permanent, when it was last time or ever that he spent 20 centre bounce attendances, to me that's almost permanent. That's getting to that.
20 is as much as 𝗟𝗏.
More than track.
I think we'll start to see those numbers becoming more regular. This is something that's been developed over the last couple of years. Remember when he first started, and he'd come in at the first bounce and then he'd disappear. So he was probably in for 3 or 4 bounces in the whole game. And now he's developed the tank and the body to be able to endure what's handed out in the middle. People underestimate how long it takes young players to get their body in the right condition to be able to sustain the efforts inside there. He is absolutely what 𝗟𝗏 used to do at Hawthorn, complete shock troop, and he's just got such great vision and agility in the middle to be able to extricate himself from situations that nobody else can. McAdam, the recruitment of McAdam enables us to be able to move him in there more often, but I think there's a couple of other factors as to why we have to move others around as well. Petrarca, we've moved forward, which means there's a hole in the middle as a result. But basically, it's because we're deficient down the forward line. We haven't got enough bodies that we'd like up there that are fit and able. So we move Petrarca there. That leaves a hole in the middle. 𝗍𝗲's got to fill that, backload it with McAdam to fill the forward small forward role. So what we're seeing is still a lot of experimentation going on. We've talked about the experimentation through necessity with Tomlinson down the back line and the flow and effects of that. Similar sorts of things are happening in the middle and up the forward line.
Spot on about a few things there, George. Working backwards, the experimentation, and there was a really good example of it this week of Langdon playing up forward. I know we've got a question about it. I reckon that's a great pickup, great sort of observation by Red and Blue Beard about McAdam. I said last week, it sounds stupid, but he's smaller than I thought he was, so I had in mind that he'd be playing that Melksham defensive role, but he's a much more sort of akin to the 𝗍𝗲 role, and I think it's a good call because if you're going to have 𝗍𝗲 in the 20, for 20 centre bounces, you need some pressure up forward. You need to have that. You can't take 𝗍𝗲 out or a player that provides his level of pressure and not be able to balance it somehow when you put him in the centre, which is why chose 7 players this week because 𝗍𝗲 was number 6, I think, from memory, and McAdam was number 7 on that list, and Chandler was right up there, and that's what Goody wants. So he wants, number one KPI for those small players is pressure. And so his pressure was fantastic this week, McAdam. I was really impressed. And good call, George. You've been talking about this for 3 years about 𝗍𝗲 ultimately being a player who could go into the centre and be that sort of shock thing. 20 is a lot, and I agree with that experimentation that they're really doing. One of the things that occurred to me about a benefit of 𝗍𝗲 in the centre, as opposed to being when he's in the forward line, the Blues, when he, in that last contest, or in that last couple of minutes, he was getting manhandled, and there was just, so many players inside 50, and they were grabbing him and blocking him and scragging him to stop him getting to the drop of the ball. In the centre, they can't do that. It's so obvious. At one point, he didn't get a free kick. He was getting hurled. But in the centre, it's there's, what is it? It's four opponents, 4 of our players, the camera, you've got the umpire looking at the contest. He's much more dangerous in the centre in some respects because you can't scrag him out of the contest, out of that first clean centre bounce. And a couple of his moves were just fantastic. And while I think of it, a couple of Nibbler's moves out of the centre were brilliant too, and setting up, particularly the one that he set up for track for a goal. It was just a beautiful bit of play by Nibbler.
And wasn't it a beautiful goal by Petrarca as well? I'd love to see more of that bursting out of the of the middle.
He's something to see, isn't he? When he's in full flight, chest forward, chest running straight at the goal.
And just on 𝗍𝗲, those 20 centre bounce attendances didn't have any effect on his output in terms of ability to kick goals for us, because the goals that he kicked were forward pocket goals as well. They weren't goals as a sort of midfielder. So,
and he looks a bit fitter this year. Roles. He was really built. He looked a lot bigger across the shoulders and chests at the beginning of last season, and he looked in much better nick this year. And that goal, the second one he kicked, was just pure bit of footy.
Beautiful. Travi14 says, thoughts on Hunter's inclusion? I've been a big advocate for Hunter for a couple of weeks now. He is AFL smart, and that can be forgotten regardless of VFL form. He does do some frustrating things, but I really like his smarts and ball use in our team, and I really like the idea of a three-man wing rotation, meaning we have run all game. Doug Green replies, he did more in the first half than Billings has in the past 4 weeks. He's tougher than Billings and matches him for skill. The knock-on he tapped to maybe Chandler from a 50-50 is proof that he even got back into defence to spoil. I don't think Billings has done that in his entire career. The inclusion of Hunter, based off his recent form, Casey had many on Demonland scratching their heads. 20 possessions in this game, 5 inside 50s, 3 score involvements and the goal. Big man, thoughts on Hunter's inclusion and his game, and is he a better option than Billings? And I don't think I know what your answer is going to be, but let's hear it.
Look, I mean, I always liked Hunter. I thought he was solid last year. But, with all due respect to Doug Ream, I reckon there's a fair bit of confirmation bias in that. I mean, George got it right eventually. Billings was dropped, 3 weeks later. But, it's a bit of a big call in terms of saying tougher than Billings in this match. So, as I've talked about a lot, the player rating is a really, really good measure. The AFL the coaches brought it in, the clubs brought it in. It measures impact. So every intervention in the game is given a score out of +6, -6 to arrive at a player score. So it was a way of, contrast. Maxi, we talk about how good his game was. I think from memory it was 24.2 or something player ratings. In this game, Lachie Hunter's player rating was 2.9. So his disposal efficiency, he had 20 disposals, great, 14 kicks. He only managed 293 metres gained. He had 1 contested possession. Of his 20 disposals, only 1 was a contested possession. He had 0 tackles. In a game where we had a really positive game tackle-wise, he only had 13 pressure acts. So by way of contrast, the previous week, Jack Billings, his player rating in the game against West Coast was 4.5, so significantly over the 2.9. He had how many contested possessions? He had 7 contested possessions, and he had let's have a look, 3 tackles. So that I actually. I'm not fussed, to be honest, either way, whether it's Billings or Hunter. They both play almost an identical role. I didn't think it was a particularly impressive performance by Hunter. I was surprised he got called up just on, I didn't see the previous game, but really just on what Georgia was saying. I'm happy for him to be inside. I think he's got a bit of grunt about him, but I wouldn't be pumping up his attack on the footy, a whole game of footy. I mean, how desperate do you want to be to play AFL footy and you can't lay a tackle in a game of footy in 5 contested possessions? So for me, it wasn't a particularly impressive game. That 2.9 player rating is about right in terms of where he was. That puts him down in the, for us, it's like the 16th ranked player or 15th ranked player, and that's including our subs. So, I nothing to write home about. He'll probably stay in the side. Goody doesn't change winning sides. They play a very similar role. I don't think we're losing anything by Hunter, but we're not gaining a huge amount on that performance, I don't think. I don't know. What did you think, George?
Pretty similar, I think. Hunter strikes me as a player at the end of his career very quickly approaching. I didn't know what the statistics were, but most of the time he was getting the ball was because somebody else gave it to him. And the number of times that I witnessed him out the back waiting for someone else to give it to him is critical. The other thing that I was really annoyed with was when he did get a mark, for example, he did it at least on 2 occasions, took 5 to 6 steps backward and then waited till the defence is set up and then kicked it to a contest. When we're trying to move the ball quickly out of the back line, that's the last thing you need. Compare the actions of that to Langdon or Windsor or 𝗍ine. When they get the ball, it is going forward. With Hunter, it came to a complete stop. Billings or Hunter, I think they're both much of a muchness. They're not very, very impressive. I think he'll stay in the side simply because while Lever's out, like there's this train, like I just explained before. If you're going to have to move Langdon to the half-forward line because A and B's not in the half-forward line, it leaves a hole on the wing. Who do you put on the wing? Well, we've got Hunter or Billings or Windsor. That's it. That's all we've got available. So I suspect he'll stay around for a while, but I don't think we'll see him staying towards the end of the season.
Langdon, Sir Magnus writes, hi all, love the podcast. I have a question on Langdon lining up at centre forward where he did for most of the game. What is your opinion on how he played this role and also the D's using the corridor more? Is there a correlation and did it work in your view? Now, I didn't clock that was where Langdon was lining up, but perhaps George did. George?
Yeah, it was obvious Langdon was playing much more forward. I mean, the fact that he had 2 shots on goal, I think, missed both of them, unfortunately. He would have been praised to if those had gone through. But it was a very typical Langdon game, the fact that he was able to get in the right position, as he does every single week. But his starting point was obviously further up the ground than what he was normally playing. This is turning out to be one of his best seasons. The way that he just covers the ground. He's always there. He's a far better option than Hunter or Billings by any stretch. But like I said, we need him further up the ground just at the moment. When things settle down a little bit, hopefully people come back from injuries. I think we'll see him back to where he truly belongs. But he's going to, like Max, he's going to be one of the great wingmen that have played for our club. And once again, we'll be saying, we watched Ed Langdon play magnificently for 5, 6, 7, many years while he was in the red and blue.
Funnily enough, he didn't have a very good game, I have to say. He had negative 0.7 on his player ratings, so meaning that overall he didn't have a positive influence on the game, and he didn't have a tackle either in this game. They only had 189 metres gained, partly that's probably where he played.
Yeah.
But the thing about him playing forward, it just goes to sort of show really is the high half forwards and wingers in some ways are a bit interchangeable in the sense that not quite, but he did a lot of defensive running up and down the ground, and I agree he's having a fantastic season, and he seems to be back to his athletic best in terms of the ground he covers.
𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁 says A&B's form is growing by the week. Do you guys think he's been given the impossible task of filling the hole that Gus left? B-Man, you're the president of the Nibbler fan club. This question is sort of made for you. So
that's a good question. I think that he's certainly got the defensive smart that Gus had. What did I say? I think he had how many centre clearances? Centre attendances. He went 11 times for centre bounces. I have to say, I think he's probably is playing one of the elements that Gus played, particularly that sort of defensive mid, someone who's defensively minded, who can get back behind the ball, who's team first. The thing that he's got over Gus, to be honest, is his ability to cover the ground at speed. Gus was aerobically fit, but wasn't particularly fast, not the way Nibbler is. As Nibbler's biggest fan, I'm amazed, actually. He's a player who's gone up a level. He's doing things now as a mid that is seriously impressive in terms of his ability to turn players inside out, making really good decisions. That kick he kicked back inboard to Tommy McDonald, who then went straight down the ground and kicked to the leading Fritter, I think it was. That was just a beautiful bit of footy, but it was also, who would have thought Nibbler 2 years ago would be the player who'd be biting off that kick, from the wing, kicking inboard to Tommy Mack. It was a great bit of play. He's really grown as a footballer this year. I think it's well known how hard he works on his game. So, that's really coming to the fore, but it's a good comparison to Gus, because the other thing is I think that leadership, he's really stood up in terms of being a leader of the club, and Gus was certainly a leader of the club. So, Nibbler was already, but his game has gone to another level, and, he did some seriously impressive bits of sort of attacking footy on the weekend, I thought.
Wells11 asks for our thoughts on 𝗏𝗏. They consistently placed him as the deepest forward today. I couldn't figure it out. Surely he's a small forward, not at all, or is it all just fitness that as yet he doesn't have? Doesn't look ready for mine. Witch's Hat says, am I the only one who thought he found space on the lead several times but was either ignored or not seen, apart from the one time when Tom Sparrow gate crashed the party? 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝘁𝗁 says, might be harsh after 2 games, but how many more games will 𝗏𝗏 get if he fails to hit the scoreboard? Pressure acts, yeah, I get it, but he's supposed to be a marking, medium-sized, goal-kicking, opportunistic forward, and all I've seen so far is mistime flies at the pack and a very small frame being pushed off the ball. And we've got a voicemail from our good mate 𝗟𝗟 about 𝗏𝗏.
Boy, 𝗟𝗟 here. Great to get a win. I can only speak to how bad St Kilda were, though. They were just hellaciously bad. Sitting there, I could not see how they were going to score, whether it was, with Eddie Kitling just lobbing the ball straight to Tomo, straight to T-Mac, who both had fantastic games. But yeah, they really made us look first-rate and themselves second-rate. Just wanted to get your thoughts on the game of 𝗏𝗏. I felt like he kept on leaping for mark of the year, just not really understanding when to stay down and when to go. I feel like he was pretty poor, really, and not sure if it can persist with him or what we do.
Look, I must say I agree a little bit. I was a little bit underwhelmed so far in his 2 appearances. Last week it was not making the distance from 35 to 40 out from goal, and this week it was only having the 4 possessions, albeit he did lay 6 tackles, and I'm sure, B-Man, you're going to bang on about that. But my biggest gripe was him going for a specky at every single occasion. And 𝗏𝗏𝘅 is guilty of that too, but he's got runs on the board and runs and goals.
There's a possibility
and goals on the board.
They're being asked to do that. I mean, come on. Haven't we had this conversation about 𝗏𝗏𝘅? Why does he keep jumping? You don't think that there's a chance that that's what the coach is asking him to do? Play tall, jump, bring the ball to ground?
No.
No. Well,
if I find out that,
keep
that's
doing
fine.
It? They wouldn't be in the team, would they?
Well, we'll see. He could be out this week. We'll see what the changes are. 𝗍𝗲's probably got license because, as I said, he's got the runs and the goals on the board. So we'll see. I don't know. I don't know. For mine, I was a bit. I'm pissed off sometimes when 𝗍𝗲 does it. But George, you can go, and then Big Man, you can jump in.
Yeah, it's only his second game after a long time on the sidelines. He didn't have a decent pre-season. I think he's been brought in to fill the hole that enables us to move 𝗍𝗲 further up the ground. I don't think he's remotely fit at the moment. He was in the last quarter and after the game even, he looked completely and utterly cooked.
And you might not have seen it because you weren't watching on TV, but there were a few times when he was chasing and he looked absolutely cooked. But
yeah, and as a small forward, I love one of the Demonlanders quotes about that flying for the mark. They said something like, 𝗍𝗲 flew for a mark, then McAdam flew for the same mark, and 30 seconds later the ball arrived. But as a small forward, you should be at the front of the pack, not the back of the pack. Yeah. And it was a pack. It's okay to do that sort of thing over the back of an individual, but not over 6 players. The ball's only going to come to ground in one location.
Ironically, we got a goal from that play. But, there you go. I guess the point of the sport is to kick goals. We happened to get a goal when he did that. But, hey, let's have him down on the ground and not fly.
Yeah, but he should be down on the ground and kicking the goal himself.
Unless the coach is telling him to do otherwise. We kicked a goal from that situation and arguably we wouldn't have.
Goody, if you're listening, please call in 0390163666 and let us know what the game plan is.
Yeah, but at the moment he's not fit and he's not chasing. After he's had to do things, he's not chasing further up the ground than he needs to. But it's only his second game.
And he laid 6 tackles, and that's pressure is what good. We talked about this we had this exact same conversation about 𝗍𝗲. Weeks would go by where he was getting 3-4 possessions, and we were talking about all his role is to play pressure. That's what Goody was saying. And McAdam, I think that the comment from Red and Bluebeard's a good one, is that he's he'll keep his spot if he's applying the level of pressure. His KPI won't be goals. It's pressure. 6 tackles inside 50 is, a big factor in why we're able to score when we went inside. But I think it's great that they're giving him a run now. But I agree that he looks like he's still got a bit to go with his fitness, that's for sure.
We've got a caller on the line. Good evening. Who am I talking to?
Noah from Brighton.
Hey, Noah. How you going?
Good. Very, very good. I'm very happy after the performance this weekend. Just wanted to thank you guys again for doing a marvellous podcast.
Oh, Noah, you're breaking up there. Just repeat what you just said. You were just congratulating us on a wonderful podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for a marvellous effort that you put in every week with producing a marvellous podcast.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate that. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so the reason I'm just calling up, part of my MFCSS sort of is coming back a little bit. A little bit worried because we're playing, Fremantle next week and then it will be Collingwood. With all the injuries now with Jake Lever at the moment in our backline, which I believe he's really essential for our defensive structure, how do you think we're going to go over the next couple of weeks without Lever? And how do you think we will be able to survive without having him in there for the next, 3 to 4 weeks? Because we need to really show that we can beat Fremantle and the Magpies to show that we're a real top 4 contender.
Well, I think we pretty much answered that question a bit earlier in terms of, we've got Tomlinson in the team at the moment, and I think he's gonna assist with that role, guys. We won't go too much in depth because we're going to talk about preview against Fremantle earlier. But are there any concerns that you have for the next couple of weeks with Lever being out? I think Tomlinson can adequately fill the role. Big Man, what are your thoughts?
I think for Tomlinson, the challenge for us is that he he doesn't have the intercepting skills that Lever does. And intercepting, we did brilliantly in this game in terms of intercept marks, as I noted before. But, Lever's role as the key interceptor is such an important part of our structure. But the flip to that is that, it really addresses one of the key challenges that a coach has. How do you keep a guy like Tomlinson motivated? Similarly with Hunter, he's played 10 games or 5 games now in the VFL. How do you keep Tomlinson's probably a better example. It's a great opportunity to get him in the side. He's got 5 coaches' votes. He's certainly, even if Lever was back this week, it would create a challenge to drop him, wouldn't it? So I've always thought that Tomlinson's sort of challenge is he's slow off the mark. But if you can cover that, and find the right one-on-one matchup, and so, for instance, he could go to 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀 this week. It's 𝗟𝗶𝘀, isn't it?
Yeah.
He would be a great matchup for 𝗟𝗶𝘀. He's strong enough to go with him. He could lock him down, and that allows T-Mac to play that role. I think it's good for that defensive unit to keep a side like St Kilda to 66 points. It should have been maybe a bit less than, by bringing in these players. And so I think we'll be fine to cover him. And also will be a good matchup, probably on 𝗦liche potentially.
Well, 𝗦liche will be injured most likely.
That's good. Whoever they bring in, Cox is injured as well. So
Cox is injured. Dogo's injured.
You won't have to worry.
As is Elliott and McStay, who we knew about. All right. Well, thank you for the call, Noah. Really appreciate it. All right, let's move on to Petty. Wodger the First says, seems there are quite a few posters that have concerns with Petty. Sure, he may not be firing on all cylinders just yet, but I reckon he still has a presence out on the ground when he plays. I think he had a lot of potential upside, and if he gets more confidence and takes more big grabs, he may be a very important cog in our forward structure come September. I would definitely persist with him in coming games. What are your thoughts? Singer, on the other hand, he says, depending on how Harry Petty's sprained ankle pulls up in the next few days, he may or may not be available next week. What did you guys make of his game today? Are you convinced that he can be turned into a forward? It just doesn't seem to be paying dividends. What other options do we have? And we have Salty as well, had something to say about Petty.
Another one is Petty. I've been an advocate for keeping him in for a long time, but 3 touches, he looked all at sea yesterday. I'm wondering whether we should potentially look at Jefferson or someone else. At this point, 3 touches in a game, an inflatable tube man's probably giving us as much option as Petty. So who else? I just don't know if we can keep going with him. Keen to hear your thoughts. Great to have a comfortable win and a relaxing day out at the G.
So Petty injured his ankle just prior to 3/4 time, but did come back on the field for a cameo appearance where he did set up a track for a goal. Ultimately, before being subbed out of the game, in his 62% of game time, he did only manage, as Salty said, 3 possessions and 1 mark, and only had 1 more possession than 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗏 in his 17% game time. So, big man, what are your thoughts about Harrison Petty? Persist up forward, send him back to defence, or send him back to 𝗟𝗄𝗃?
Jesus, I'm pretty much in the same boat as Salty, I reckon, because he's almost sort of what we were just talking about 𝗍𝒄𝘁 2-3 years ago. Well, at the start of 𝗍𝒁's career, we were saying, if he's playing his role 2 or 3 possessions, doesn't matter. Perhaps the same thing can be said of Petty, but I'm just looking at his numbers. So it's not like an outlier that he only got 2 kicks. So he got 2 kicks against the Saints, only 3 kicks against the West Coast, 3 against Carlton. He had looks like almost a season high, 9 against Geelong, 4 against Richmond, only 2 against the Lions. So it's not like he's getting many.
How many marks?
He's not getting many possessions. It's getting harder and harder to make a case for him. I think, this sounds a bit glib, but, he's really important structurally. I mean, I know those numbers aren't, he's not impressing. And he looks like an extra from 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗏𝗀. Every match, whether at the beginning of a match he looks like he's limping. He's always he's unbelievable. But I think he's important is those contests down the line. And if you haven't got Benny Brown playing that, we talked a few weeks ago when Benny Brown played really well and played a key role in getting up and down the ground. Is that that's the sort of bullocking role that T-Mac was asked to play in the last few years, and that's what Petty's playing now. who else? I guess this is what George often says as well. If not Petty, who else? I mean, it can't be Jefferson. Why? Jefferson kicked 5. I didn't watch any of it, so I'll hopefully George didn't and can give a review on it. But we didn't bring in Van Rooyen at all in his first season, and he was miles and miles ahead of where Jefferson is in terms of his development. I don't see much value in bringing in a half-done Jefferson when is he going to give us much more than Petty? Brown didn't look like he's fit, so then who does that leave? So, maybe it's a case of, who would come in for him. I'd love to know specifically what his role is, but I suspect a big part of it is to sort of be a defensive forward, to run that defender up the ground, to work hard, to give an option down the line. But his numbers don't make for a compelling story, do they?
There's also the added thing of JVR having to go do the relief rucking. So
Petty only took one ruck. Contest.
No, I'm not talking about Petty taking the ruck. I'm talking about when Max goes off the ground, JVR goes into the ruck. We need a key forward down there. So
yeah. I mean,
maybe.
I've always, to be honest, I always thought that everyone was a bit quick to anoint him a gun forward on the back of 3 weeks of really good footy and kicking 6 straight or whatever it was against the Tigers. And I'm not as enamoured with his forward skill. And as I said, he's certainly not making a case for being one of the elite forwards at the moment. I don't know, George, what do you reckon?
I think you've summed it all up. What's the next option? Well, Ben Brown, despite 3 goals this week, just is not agile enough. We saw that particularly in the Eagles game. He just can't get the separation as a forward against other quality AFL defenders. You can get away with it at VFL level, but not at AFL level. Jefferson, if you threw him in, you would kill him. Binman's absolutely right. We held JVR back for a year when he was showing a lot more than Jefferson has. Jefferson's just starting to show some highlights, some promise, but you can't throw him in and expect him to perform at the AFL level to any suitable standard. The other thing to remember about Petty is you're right about it being a Gallipoli sort of candidate. People forget that he spent the first quarter of the season with foot injuries once again, if you don't get a decent pre-season, you've got to look at 2 to 3 months of match fitness. I hate that word, but you've got to get that sort of time into your body to be able to play at AFL level. Petty didn't get it. So he's holding a position down for us that we desperately need. Fullerton hasn't shown anything whatsoever, either as ruck or forward, so that's been a huge disappointment, and that's all we've got.
And you've got to, I know it sounds sort of a cliche these days, and Goody says it in the presser, he brings the ball to ground in our forward.
Yep.
So I mentioned our tackles inside 50. Well, the ball doesn't hit the deck if the opposition are carving us up on intercept marks. And, Petty doesn't get beaten very often where his opponent marks it. So, that really is the most important role. And, that's why he's in there. And I think it's sort of interesting. It goes to the discussion about us not playing our best footy yet. And we're Clayton Oliver, even Benny Brown when he came in, arguably even when T-Mac came in, and certainly Petty, none of them were 100% fit when they came in. Petty's taking longer to get there, and so is Clayton, but it clearly is part of their plan, their management plan.
Salem's another one.
Salo's another one, exactly. Straight back in, and yeah.
All right, we do have a caller on the line. I think we've got Enzo. How are you going, mate?
Good evening, fellas. What a great, just a great turnaround from the week before. And I think Gordon must have listened to me about the West Coast game. 2 things. Reason why we won this game is we didn't have a slow start like we have for the last 10, 11 weeks. So we started better, and we got the ball in the forward 50 a lot more. That's the 2. For us to score a winning score, we can't be having less than 40 inside 50s. Anytime we have less than 40 inside 50s, you're not going to get close to winning. So we got 50 times in there, and a better start. So better start gives you a better better outlook for the whole game. When you have a better start, you have confidence. Last week, we lost to West Coast because we had a slow start and we gave them confidence the first quarter. And from that point on, we couldn't turn it around. So, yeah, maybe it's listening to, that's two things I wanted them to address, and they addressed that this week.
Yeah, they certainly did. I'm just going to turn your channel down for a sec because I got a lot of noise, I think, from your truck there. B-Man, slow starts. We didn't have one this week. What did we kick? 4 goals, 6 or 7 in the first quarter?
I think that's a great point. And, we've been criticised for our slow starts quite rightfully. We didn't have a slow start. The other thing we've been criticised this season is not for having 4 quarters of consistent effort, and I thought that we did this week. 2 big ticks, good start, and 4 quarters of pretty consistent effort. So I think they're 2 real positives for sure.
All right, thank you there, Enzo, for your call. Next one, Bigfoot says, a welcome return to JVR this week. We really missed him last week. Our forward line functioned so much better with him in it. I really wish he didn't have to do so much relief rucking on top of it. I did see an interesting stat online yesterday. The Ds were 9 wins and 0 losses when JVR kicks multiple goals. So there you go. 9 wins, 0 losses when JVR is on fire. So George, we'll just go quickly on this because we've got a couple more.
Yeah, all I can say is I totally agree with Bigfoot. He is a natural full forward, and the pity is that we have to use him as the second ruck because we don't have any other real options on the field. The 3 goals that he kicked were just absolutely pure, clean, full forward roles, brilliantly executed, and as soon as he's in there, he changes the whole structure of the forward line. Yeah, we struggle with Petty in there, or we struggle with others, being tried out in the forward line. But as soon as JVR goes into the forward line, we start to look like a really decent side. So, it's a pity that we have to use him elsewhere. I hope we don't break him.
Kid is a gun. I cannot believe he doesn't get more pumped up by D's fans. I can wear the media sort of giving him short thrift, but the kid's only 21, and we've talked for ages about like the strength that they develop. His goal where he didn't mark, should have got a free kick, but stood up, didn't go to ground, and was able to sort of under pressure turn his body around to kick that goal was the sort of strength. Imagine how strong he's going to be when he's 25, 26. Yeah. He's just going to be a beast, that kid. And already he's a beast, and he takes his chances. He's an accurate kick for goal and takes his chances. So I made such a big rap on Rui.
Yeah, imagine where he's going to be when he's sort of Curno's age. Forget about when he's going to be Hawkins
2.0.
Yeah, yeah. So didn't you say that he was this was a while ago, that his numbers were tracking much better than some of the current full forwards?
Yeah. Well, equally, definitely. For instance, I mean, the only one who's comparable really is 𝗟𝗄𝗄, and one of the big differences between the two of them is Rui goes at 72% or something for accuracy at goal, shots at goal, and 𝗟𝗄𝗄 is just a tick over 50%, and the job is to kick goals, and he doesn't miss many of them.
And 𝗟𝗄𝗄 doesn't have to play in the ruck.
No, 𝗟𝗄𝗄 doesn't have to play in the ruck, and is a year older than Rui, and so therefore another year in the AFL system.
This one's right up your alley, B-Man, so I hope you're ready. Radish D says, while the Ds were good today, I've been pondering the long-term viability of the red and blueprint for the rest of the season, thinking about what has worked and what hasn't worked. Stick with me here. The ability to intercept or otherwise cause turnovers doesn't seem to be a problem for the Ds. It's what we do with the ball once we have it that can cause problems. To transition a back half intercept into a score, the team with the ball must be able to quickly move the ball into the forward 50 by either A, taking uncontested marks to move the ball forward, B, using handball, run and carry to move the ball quickly, C, taking a contested mark, usually on the wing, or D, win a contested ball off a marking contest, again, usually on the wing. We know that the Ds aren't a great kicking team or a great speed team, for 3/4 anyway. I believe this changes late in games, which makes us look a lot better because it opens up more transition avenues. So options A and B are not reliable to build the red and blue print around. That leaves us with C and D, which both rely on big body forwards to compete in the air around the middle of the ground. When those forwards aren't marking, the smaller forwards and mids need to gather the ground balls so that we can score. My theory is that when we look bad, e.g. versus the Lions and versus the Eagles, the forwards aren't taking the marks on the wing and the mids and forwards aren't in the contest. So our transition from turnover ends on the wing and is over before it begins. Do we have access to any stats on percentage of turnovers transition to scores or something like that? To this end, I think we are best suited to playing 7 true talls, 2 forward, 3 back and 2 rucks. It gives us more options to win the contested ball on the wing and drive the ball forward. This is why I'm very concerned that Goody has moved to playing 6 talls again, with McAdam and Fritsch playing the hybrid. But the wing is not where either of them excels. A key player we need to find, either internally or externally, is a big body tall that can play forward, bring the ball to ground, and play backup ruck. JVR fills this need, but I think we need a second. If the player in question can be a bit of an enforcer to deal out some payback for the elevated physicality sent towards Max, then all the better. What does the panel think? Can this be Varel or Jefferson? B-Man, question's got your name written all over it, but George, I know that you can have thoughts on it too, because you have seen some of these guys play in the twos.
So I read the question and sort of gave it some thought. The shorter answer is well, I don't think we can carry an extra big with this model, because the problem is that it's not actually I take the point about the contested marks, but the contested marks are more important in that forward half game that we played in 21-22, because you're kicking a lot to long contested kicks. So that's the way Geelong have been playing, kicking long down the line. That's their transition method. They're the least number of kicks in the AFL, and they get it long and forward and back themselves in to win that contested mark. So we could play that model, but that's not the model we're using. In fact, what we're doing, and it was interesting in this game, so our highest number of uncontested marks this season is our demolishing of the Dogs, and then the Cats was our next highest until this game. So this was our second highest uncontested marks, 124 in this game. And what we did is look to spread them. So I think that model of having the extra tall, my view is that we approach the finals, we'll revert back to a model that we've used in the last 2 years. I watched, which game was it? The Geelong Giants game. And that high-pressure finals-like game, it reverted into a finals-like just smash-em-up derby type brutal game of footy. That's what finals are like. So you can, maybe you need that third big, but we've got Petty up there, and that's the role that he plays. I think that, that was being touched on there. The other thing is, you bring another big in, then you're losing the kilometres that player can run. So to 124 uncontested marks, the key is in that transition is to not switch it, is to go forward. But that requires heaps of players sprinting and running to offer a lead and hit up, and that requires a lot of aerobic capacity. So another big, let's say Varel I don't think is fit enough anyway. He's a ways off being fit enough, but he would then be a liability. I mean, the reason why Benny Brown gets a gig is because of his ability to cover 12, 13 kilometres a game. Varel's not going to be able to do that. So you're 10 kilometres down. And the model for us as transition is to take that Brisbane Lions model of a lot of short hit-up kicks. So 124 in this game. We deliberately look to spread the Saints in this game. That model, so it's less about contested marks in that situation. And I think that, to be honest, part of my logic about why we're playing this model is to be less banged up come finals. And I think they want to stop having so many contested markings so Max doesn't get smashed so often. So bringing another big in would just drive more contested marking. I think they want to reduce the amount of stoppages, reduce the amount of contest, reduce the amount of the opportunities for Rui, if he's going to be the second ruck to get smashed in the back of the head, or Maxi to get smashed in the back of the head. And if you look at that again, that third quarter is a really perfect quarter to watch just by itself to see what they're trying to do, because they spread, they went quick, they used the width of the MCG, and they stayed away from contest, low stoppages, low contest. And as you know, of course, there's always going to be contested marking down the line, but I think that's what Petty's in the team for. He probably would struggle to get a game without that. Van Ruin, obviously, I think they're using Petty as the grunt. Maybe that's offsetting Van Ruin going into the ruck. He's doing less of that running up and down the ground. Petty's doing that sort of donkey work. So the short version is I don't think it will fly to have another big in, and in any case, Varel's not ready, Jefferson's not ready, Fullerton doesn't look like he is, the answer, and he's not particularly big and strong, Fullerton either, so he's not necessarily going to be a big. I'll defer to George on that. He's seen more of him, but. So, maybe come finals they'll look at it. I think the in will be 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗏. That'll be the player who will come in if he's fit and firing, that will come back into this side. He is exactly that hybrid that's mentioned in the question.
I'll just add a little bit into that. I'm totally on board with Bin Man on this one. I think that Goody said it before in previous seasons, and we've learnt particularly in 2022, you can't go into finals banged up. You've got to have the players available, and part of that is the way you play during the season. You can't afford to approach every game as a finals match. Finals are different from what's in the season, and you've got to keep your best players available for the finals, because, as you mentioned in the GWS Geelong game, it turns into a finals match, and both teams smash into each other. During the home and away seasons, it's one game. So if you can preserve players to be able to be available towards the end of the season, you're going to be in the right position. I had a quick look, for example. I think the other one for Bin Man to keep an eye on when he starts talking about loading around the bye period is, I think they're going to change this year, and I think they're going to change simply because the fixture and the turnarounds that players are being asked to do these days will prevent serious loading in the middle of the year, has been the traditional sort of thing. Looking at other teams and their injury lists, GWS has got 13 players on their list. This is 11 games in the season, so barely halfway.
It's amazing. It's incredible.
13 players on their injury list. Collingwood's got 16. Richmond's got 18. Carlton's got 12. Brisbane's got 8. Western Bulldogs 9, Melbourne 8, Hawthorn 9, and Sydney 9. That's a lot of players to have missing.
Serious injuries in that.
Serious injuries at the halfway point during the season. You can't afford, like Collingwood, to have 16 players out of your 44 not available. And guess what? A lot of those players are those tough inside, people like 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝘁𝗏, people who play a hard game. The real concern is for Geelong, who've only got 4 players missing, one of whom's Dangerfield, who's the only one who's played a senior game. So Geelong's list at the moment is their full list basically available, and they've lost 4 in a row. So they won't be able to rest players coming into the second half as they have done in previous years, simply because this is their best, and their best isn't all that good. But I think all these clubs will be seriously looking about the way they manage players and the way they play the game up until finals.
I totally agree, and I think it's an interesting point about the bye period, because we've already had a bye, and that's what I think, as I said last week, I think we used that 10-day break into the Eagles game, and then maybe they're staggering that sort of preparation through the season. And just on the Eagles game last week, pat my own back here, is what did I say about what would happen to the Eagles this week? And it goes to the point about the effort they put in last week. Let's see how they go. And don't get into this thing about they're a younger team. They're basically the same age as us, right? So they could not back up that performance last week. And I said on the show last year, you watch, they all come out and get smashed by the Crows. And what happened? They got flogged by 120 points. And that's people, or whatever it was, 80 points.
99.
People go, oh, well, how could Melbourne get flogged by that team? Because they spent all of their pennies last week. They targeted that game clearly. We were very disappointing, and Goody was clearly super frustrated to lose that game. And they had nothing left in the tank and were flat as a tack the next week. Meanwhile, we come up, play our best sort of running on top of the game, ground footy, because we were fit and firing to go. Your point about the injuries is such a good one, George. It's getting close to being a major. I mean, it already is a major problem for the AFL. They want to turn every game Friday night into a finals-like game. Back in the day, when I was talking about going to the 70s in the footy, you'd only get one or two replays on the weekend. There was all bunches of games were not like finals games. They were, they were out at Windy Hill or wherever. And now so many games have this build-up. They're marquee games, and the season is just ridiculously long. And we haven't got enough elite level footballers to have 16, 15, 14 players off AFL lists.
Well, Geelong fans, if you're listening, don't despair about 4 losses in a row, because every game is not a litmus test. Some wise man once told me.
Well, four turns into a pattern, though, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, a predictive pattern, you can say. And I'm still convinced that the D's broke the Cats.
Well, it's good to hear. Lazy says, much better intensity from the get-go this week, despite a few off periods. Do we sometimes need to be more patient as footy fans? A lot of people around me were going bonkers with the slower ball movement, but St Kilda had set up their defensive structure very well, and us going fast would almost certainly have meant turning it over in vulnerable areas of the ground. I thought this was a steady approach to chip around and patiently wait for an opening, and lo and behold, when we finally broke through, the floodgates then opened. Are we, the fans, too harsh of markers? Well, the fans around me were going nuts about this too, and they must not listen to Big Man on this podcast, and I must tune out too, because I was going bonkers as well, because I guess it's hard to shake the kick the bloody thing out of me, George, and then I guess Big Man will want to chime in about our chipping around, and we sort of touched on it a little bit in the last
Yeah, we have, and I think one of the changes is we just spoke about preserving your players, and we will in the next little segment as well. This is how you preserve your players. You don't need to go flat chat all the time, or in the contested environment all the time. The other thing was the way we approached the game was much more methodical, because it had to be. We didn't have Lever at centre half back, with the intercept and then the quick movement coming out. Getting the ball in Salem's hands becomes much more methodical. But guess what? The ball gets up the other end when you start to get to play that approach. And it's doubled up when you've got a defensive structure like St Kilda. It's not really a defensive structure. It's just get 18 players behind the ball.
Yeah, it's a bit like what the Cats do, isn't it? Just get their troops behind the ball. And
sometimes it's just impossible, depending on where the turnover occurs. It's okay when you get a quick run on, and you can basically out sprint them, or at least level with them going up the other end of the ground. But sometimes when you get, say, a free kick in the half back line, they've already flooded back. It's too late then. You're pushed into more methodical and slower movement. So the fans are a little bit harsh, but at the end of the day, as we'll talk about in the next segment, we're preserving players as well. We don't need to be running flat chat, especially against a pathetic team like St Kilda. I know we'll all love to beat them by 150 points, which we could have, Andy in particular, but it's about getting to the end of the season, having sufficient percentage at the end of the season, and still finishing in top 4.
And the other thing to add is that chipping it around does 2 things, or 3 things. One, it fits with what I was saying about us using uncontested marking. So that's been a real feature of some of our games, is how high number of uncontested marks. So keep in mind, previous to that 140 odd that we kicked uncontested marks against the Dogs, the previous most under Goody was 117. That's 3 times we've had more than 117. That was way back in 2017 by Goody. So we're clearly using it as a strategy. Second thing is, we've got the footy. They don't have the footy. They can't, so it's a classic basketball thing, isn't it, George, is to burn the clock down by possession, and same in soccer. The third thing is that, we've had fans screaming for 3 years is stop kicking into a crowded forward line and putting on top of the head of packs of 20 and having intercept marks. Why don't you be patient and move it around and spread them? And when we do, people want it kicked inside. It's like, some people can't be pleased.
Can't please everyone all the time. Lefty says, expected score chat, trigger alert. I was frustrated, as were most fans, that we didn't take our chances in the first half and put the game to bed early as a result of our inaccuracy in front of goal. Looking back, though, we had a lot of difficult set shots at goal, and if you look at the expected scores, 98 from 95.7 expected to 62 from expected 79.5. And we only beat the Saints by 16 points in expected scores, even though it felt like we should have won by 10 goals. Doug Reamer says, as Andy would say, we should have beaten St Kilda by 60 plus today if we kick straight, and after losing to West Coast, the percentage would have been more than handy. And Pingu says, any concerned about the junk time goals that we conceded just before half time and then the 3 goals we conceded at the end of the match? We probably cost ourselves a little bit of percentage. So, big man, did we fail to bank percentage yesterday? Did the expected score get it right? Are you happy to bank the 4 points, or were we just conserving our energy as we've been talking about for the past 10 minutes or so?
Well, look, it was 100% as a fan. I hate those goals when you've got a good 50-point win or something and they score 3 easy goals. And one of them, by the way, on the knock Hunter train was from a really poor bit of play by Hunter that turned it over on our back flank and it went up the other end where we could have scored on that play. Chandler, I think. Maybe Chandler kicked it on the full. So we coughed up an easy goal when we could have had a shot at goal. So that was frustrating as a fan.
That was Hunter.
Was it Hunter?
Yeah, kicking to Chandler, I think it was, but kicked it out on the full.
Yeah, so that cost us a goal when we would have had a shot at goal. So they're definitely frustrating. In the scheme of things, it didn't cost, 3 goals isn't going to cost us much percentage, and maybe, I don't know, by the end of the season, very little. But expected score was brought in by the club so that they had a tool to be able to have a proper sense of how the game was without the score being such, the win-loss clouding everyone's thinking. And so, it really helped me think about this game the thinking is that we should have won that game by 10 goals is on expected score. We only won it by 18 points. And I think that's useful, or 17 points. So our 16 points. So on expected score, we only win the game by 16 points. We will bang on our expected score. So it would have been great if we'd sort of taken a few more of our chances in the first quarter because, as I've said a few weeks ago, there's nothing beats scoreboard pressure. And I was really hoping, to be honest, for a flex performance where we came out and flexed and really smashed them, which we could have if we got those early goals and we really put them away, and even in that third quarter. But bang on expected score, they weren't. Right, so 16 points was the margin, and I think that's really instructive. So we think, these fans think, we should have won that game by 10 goals. Well, no, the expected score was under 3 goals. So it probably, that's what Goody would say is the performance wasn't as good. We had 50 points plus 50 points from the defensive half, 54 points on turnover, and then we only win the game by expected score 16 points. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It wasn't. That's why I downgraded it from a great win to a solid win. Good to get the 4 points in the percentage, but that's what the purpose of the expected score is, to give a better sense of it. So these fans might have walked away thinking, we should have won that by 10 goals. Saints fans probably realistically saying, well, we should have been a lot closer. 16 points, makes it not such a great, performance by us, does it?
The other thing that people don't notice at the ground that you get the advantage of watching on the television was those junk time goals came. They showed our interchange bench at the time, and I think it had Max, Langdon, Petrarca, and Fritsch.
Yeah,
and you go, we have just put the queue in the rack, and that's why they get those junk time goals. But at the end of the day,
he came off with 4 full minutes to go or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank God he did too. So that's a really good point.
And that's about preserving players yet again. Yeah. What's the point in? Yes, we gave up 3 goals.
Yeah, what's the point? Should we hit? And then Maxi gets injured because we want to win by 50 points.
Yeah.
And everyone then says, "Why didn't they take Maxi off?" It's like.
All right, let's get on with it. Casey versus Sandringham in a high-scoring game out at Casey Fields. The Casey Demons narrowly lost to the Sandringham Zebras, who secured a 13-point victory. The first half saw a tight contest with Sandringham leading by just 4 points at halftime. The Zebras dominated the third quarter, extending their lead to 28 points by outscoring Casey 7-2. In the final quarter, Mitch White led a fierce comeback for the Demons, narrowing the gap to a single point as Casey piled on 5 consecutive goals. White had an outstanding game, recording 38 disposals and 2 goals. Matt Jefferson also shone with 5 goals, 3 behinds, while Bailey Laurie added 2 goals and 25 disposals. Ben Brown contributed 3 goals and 3 behinds from 9 marks, and Andy Benese Wakefield impressed with 33 disposals. Jack Billings had 24 disposals, whilst Colton Tolstrup had 23. George, you were the only one that watched the game. Let's get some brief thoughts on
this. Unlike the previous 2 weeks, this was a great game to watch. The free-flowing movement throughout the whole field for both sides was just fantastic to watch. It was a great spectator's view of what Australian rules football was like. From Casey's perspective, it was disappointing because they came back in the last quarter, particularly, were 4 goals down or something like that, and got back to within a point with 2 minutes to play. And guess what? Membry pops up and kicks a goal to basically seal the match, and then they finished off with another junk time type of goal. Individual performances, I think people are more interested in anything else. Tolstrup's really starting to show some really, really good signs. He's playing a lot of time around the middle, and you just know he has got the talent necessary to play at AFL level. He's just got football smarts, and he's tough and hard. He absolutely laid out there Ruckman Campbell, who's a good 6 inches, 8 inches taller than him and a lot more kilograms. He hit him good and hard at one point, and you go, yeah, this is a kid who's 18 years of age. The others, Kynan Brown is showing a lot as well. He pops up now and again with some just natural footballer skills. He just seems to be in the right place at the right time. Still got to build a big tank. Seston was moving much further up the ground this week. He's also showing a lot more, but again has to build the tank. Everyone would be impressed with Jefferson. He's again showing a lot more second efforts, a lot more work as he moves up the ground. He's starting to get the idea of about what's expected as a full forward. Kicking 5 goals was great. He could have had a couple more as well. Ben Brown kicked 3, mainly, and he should have kicked 6. His accuracy is not what it used to be. Most of those were easy set shots. And the 3 goals, he got a number of marks, basically because the ball was put on his head. And being 2 metres, he's taller than everybody else around. It wasn't because it was on the lead. His mobility is not what it used to be. I think everybody knows that. But it's easy to say, he's kicked 3 goals. But, yeah, he's not going to get away with standing like a statue at AFL level. You're going to have 2 backmen coming over the top and just punching it away from it, and the 2 backmen are probably the same size as you. So Mitch White was fantastic. The thing that's let Casey down and has all season is the players that they're bringing in as replacements are really second rate. You'll get some brilliant pieces of play, and then somebody won't be able to execute a hand pass or a kick, and the ball heads straight down the other end as a result of it. Andy Monzese Wakefield, bucket load of possessions. He played almost like a Tomlinson role as the interceptor down the back, so it's not surprising he got a bucket load of possessions, and he was also doing the kick-outs. So that's another way to get lots and lots of statistics, but his disposal... He shows a lot, but he just keeps letting himself down. There was one point where he took an intercept mark in the half-back line, 3 bounces going through the middle of the field, and then he handballed to someone who was about half a metre away from him. The ball was turned over and went promptly back over his head, sort of to the other end. It just deflates the team, and if he'd taken the opportunity even just to kick it long into the forward line, people would be going, oh yeah, there's something special there. But he's just doesn't seem to have that ability to take that next step. So yeah, it was an interesting game. We're seeing the good development in Jefferson. We're seeing good development in Verrill. We're seeing good development in Adams. None of them are ready to play AFL level footy at the moment. We could certainly use them, but they're not quite available. So, yeah, it was disappointing to lose in that game. But, it's the nature of the side that's being able to be put on the field each week. I think the commentators were making the point we've got half of the Frankston YCW team running around in 𝗙cie colours.
Let's get on to the injury list. Based on the injury list from last week, no one's likely to be returning to the field of action. We're still waiting on the severity of any injury to 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀𝗃, as he was subbed out of the game with an ankle injury. In the post-game presser, Goody noted that it was just a rolled ankle and that he'd be right to go for the upcoming match against the Dockers. However, we have heard that story post-match before, and Petty does have a history of foot-related injuries, so that have seen him sidelined for long periods of time. So watch this space, and we'll see probably tomorrow the injury report will come out. Let's get into changes versus Fremantle. And boys, if Petty doesn't get up, who do we place him with? And keep in mind that we're coming up against a team who has two genuine ruckmen in their ranks. And if Rui is going to be the relief ruckman to Max, that leaves us very light in the tall forward department if Petty doesn't get up from injury. We had a question from 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗀𝘀 in the chat room, and he said, great show as always, guys. Do you think it's time to give 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀 a full game rather than starting him as a sub? We all love Windsor, but he was quiet on the weekend. Would starting 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 on the wing this week be worth a shot against Freo? So what changes are we making this week? Big Man, followed by George. And if you want to answer 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀's question, that'd be great.
I suspect they'll make no change. If Goody, assuming everyone's fit, Goody doesn't make changes very often when you win by 6 goals, and we shouldn't forget, regardless of what the expected score was, and regardless of whether we could have beaten them by 60 points or whether we were lucky to get a 38-point margin or whatever it was, a 6-goal win is a 6-goal win. That's a really interesting question about Windsor, isn't it? Because he's definitely dropped off. It's not that surprising. He had 12.3 was his player rating against the Cats, then 8.9 the next week, 2.7 against West Coast, and he's dropped to 2.3 in this match just gone. And against Carlton, he had 404 metres gained and only 241 in this game. It depends a little bit where he's at, but his speed is so important. I could see maybe probably 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀 being sub again. I could see the logic in bringing 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀 in, but he hasn't got the pace that Windsor has, although, again, he's been a bit off in terms of that stuff, Windsor. So on the wing, I don't think he's a natural winger, but 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, I would like him to get a full game. He's deserved it, I think. Although he didn't set the house on the world on fire, did he, when he came in this game? I don't think they'll make a change, is the short. I think 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 will be the sub, and they'll run with the same starting 22 essentially.
I think they won't make changes, but I think we might see the change on the sub. I think 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 offers more than Hunter does, for example, at the moment.
I wouldn't mind 𝗍𝗀𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 coming in and Hunter going to the sub, but
yeah. The only difficulty is that Hunter can't play anywhere else other than wing. And I think 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 is capable of playing, half forward, half back.
Yeah, he played all right at half back when he.
But that's the only real change that I can see. Windsor, may drop back to sub himself. That's the other possibility. It's so easy to forget that the kid's 18 and he's played 10 games of footy. It's pretty brutal, and he's probably due for a rest in any case, and this might be the opportunity. So
absolutely. And leaving aside the whole discussion of load management and all of that stuff, no one's arguing with the fact that it's a tough game to be playing, and he's 11 weeks into his first season. A player who does a lot of running Cumulative fatigue across the entire AFL starting to show. Some of the games, George, are some pretty average patches of footy at this time of year, and some of the games I watched on the weekend, or bits of them, were terrible.
Pretty ordinary. Yep.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on if Petty doesn't get up, particularly with the whole backup ruck situation, with Rui having to go into the ruck and leaving us a bit light on key position forwards for periods in the game? Is that a problem?
Andy from Demonland is the answer for that. He's going to be selected this week.
Well, here's a bit of a conundrum because Benny Brown looks miles off, and Rel isn't fit enough, and there's no way they bring in Jefferson. I can't see that happening. So who does that leave? They're more likely to go play small ball up forward, are they, and bring in, I don't know, maybe Tolstrup, maybe the Colt comes in and and plays a high enough, forward sort of role or an impact player role when you have 𝗍𝗲 playing more ball on ball time. Sorry, Josh.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it's at Alice Springs as well. It's is there going to be the same needs as at other grounds? I wouldn't be surprised if Tolstrup comes in as a sub this week. It's an opportunity. It's hard to say. It really is.
Petty could. The other option is that if Petty couldn't get up, I reckon they could throw Tomlinson forward and then bring in a medium size to go. But Howes comes back in, for instance, for a straight swap for Tomlinson, and Tomlinson goes, or T-Mac. T-Mac could come up and play forward, Petty out. Howes comes in for T-Mac. Howes plays an intercepting role. He plays sneaky tall. So Howes won't be out of this team for very long. I'm sure that there was sort of some thinking around, maybe his effort level in the West Coast game. But again, he's a young player in his first season of AFL footy, not his first season at the club, but certainly his first season at senior level. So that would probably work. Howes in for Petty, and with T-Mac going forward or Tomlinson going forward.
All right, the preview. Dockers have been the D's bogey team in their last few matchups for Demons home games. However, those games have been played at the G, and this week both teams will meet halfway on neutral territory in the Northern Territory at Traeger Park in Alice Springs. The fortunes of both teams have somewhat mirrored each other this season, with some expected wins, some unexpected losses, and being on the wrong side of some close results. A draw is the only thing that separates the two teams on the ladder, making this another 8-point game. And boys, how do we dismantle the team from Fremantle?
Is it a 6-point game? Seeing they're 2 points behind.
Yes. How are we going to... George, how are we going to dismantle the Fremantle, particularly where they're two genuine ruckmen?
Well, I hope they play their two genuine ruckmen because it's not working at the moment. There was some interesting statistics. I think Bin Man's best friend, David King, showed at some point during the week Darcy playing with Jackson severely affects Jackson's capabilities.
He just got a ruck all day, Jackson.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
He's just not a forward, really, is he? I mean, he'd be frustrating the hell out of us if he was playing at the Ds and he was our forward option. Because you've got to run 𝗍𝗍 90% of the time in the ruck.
Yeah, but Darcy is a plodder, and he is seriously unfit at the moment. I watched him against Collingwood. He's so far behind, for example, the opposition ruckman when after the centre bounce. Jackson, on the other hand, is into everything, but because Jackson's being used as a forward, he's not getting the access to the clearances and the hit-outs that we all know that he's perfectly capable of. Please play Darcy and Jackson together. In their midfield, I hope they play Fife because he is completely and utterly finished as a player. He just can't. you can see where
be a motivational speaker for.
This is going to come back and bite me for sure.
Yeah, he's going to be 10 coaches' votes.
10 for 5, 9 for
Darcy.
Darcy and
Jackson kicks 7.
But against Collingwood, you could see Fyfe's intent all the time. He knew where he wanted to put the ball. He knew what he had to. He just couldn't execute anymore. He was just one of those players, unfortunately, at the end of his career, and he's just not capable. They are totally dependent on, and they've got some very good players in the midfield in Brayshaw and Young. They are seriously first-class A-grade players. So they're going to match up well, but Fyfe's not what he used to be. The other good news for us is Frederic's out this week with concussion.
Oh, is he right?
Yeah. Very early in the game, he got a concussion injury, which depletes them. He's a great player for their side. I'm not sure what Longmuir's game plan is. They start out with a very stilted possession type game that Geelong used to play. Get the ball, chip it around, just hold it. It's just not going to work against us. So if they go into that mode, I don't think they're going to get anywhere. They finally released the shackles a bit against Geelong, and suddenly they started to get some scores. Their other forward, not Tracy, the other guy, what's his name? I can't remember.
Amos.
Yeah, he is the worst kick in the league.
He's at the moment. He wasn't last year.
No.
He's got that short run-up, He's up two or three steps.
It's not a run-up, it's a walk-up. He takes 3 or 4 walking steps and then tries to kick the ball, and it just doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't make the distance. Yeah. Seriously,
I bet he'll fix that up.
That's been going on for the last couple of weeks. You would think the coach should be taking him aside and going, just run up, do a Ben Brown type approach if you have to get some momentum, but he's got none. They've
By
got.
the way, Amos is the other one. He's the only one comparable to Van Rooyen in the sense they were almost exactly the same age and they were drafted in the same year. Both have had the same amount of years in the system, and I reckon Rui's ahead of Amos. I mean, he's a bloody good mark, Amos.
Both him and Tracy are magnificent marks. So
he's a good kid, good player, Amos. But I reckon Rui's got him.
Yeah, he needs to finish to be really, really effective. Sonny Walters, since he came back from injury, isn't what he used to be. He simply couldn't put himself in the game in the last couple of games that he's played. Look, this game could go either way because we don't know what the effects or Alice. It sounds like it's going to be a magnificent day up in Alice.
18 degrees. Minimum 2, but we're not playing in the morning. Sunny, the chance of morning frost, and that's not Sam. That's just normal frost. Light winds. I don't think there's any chance of demon frost. Light winds becoming northeast. We can't even complain about the winds 15 to 20. That's perfect.
Yeah, and the rain's going through on Thursday, so we're pretty well safe. So
that's right. Well, remember the forecast this time last year? It was like for 60 mils, and then that's what happened. So you're right
safe.
about. Sorry, Josh.
No, that's all right.
You're right. You're right about the game style of Freo. I feel like they have team rules that they stick to. So they're the highest handballing team in the AFL by country mile. So they're averaging 165.5 handballs a game. Next is 159.6, the Bulldogs, and then it's Giants and Essendon and Adelaide. So they use handball a lot to spread. And the Dogs are next. And I've always thought that model has got a flaw in it in terms of high pressure games. Handball, you're not getting territory. Every time there's an opportunity for that chain to break. Fredericks is a big out because they really like to spread, and they play a little bit the way we've been playing with those chip and marks, and really like to spread the ground. And I can't remember how big is Traeger Park. Is it? Am I right to think that it's MCG size, or am I imagining that?
I'll look that up.
So they really like that spread, but they're not zinging at all off halfback flank. So they're sort of playing a half a transition game, but they've got that almost Ross Lyon defensive mindset of keeping themselves in the game, but they've got no hurt factor going forward because, they moving the ball better in the second half of last season when they needed to get going and getting some wins. And a bit like the Saints, it'd be really frustrating to watch them or be a fan because they never put teams out of business. And so other teams are always in with a chance, as we've seen a few games that they've lost they shouldn't have lost with the amount of ball they had. So we match up well against them, apart from the fact that, I guess the recent record doesn't demonstrate that. And I've always thought that Longmuir has modelled a lot of his philosophies around Goody, particularly defence first, being a defence first coach. And they've got a great defence. I know probably guilty of underrating him a bit early, the end of last year. But Pearce is just a gun, isn't he? And what's the other fella up there, the guy with the dyed blonde hair, the white hair,
Ryan.
They work well together. Pearce is just a total gun. I'm so glad that they drew that match, but if we kicked that goal, I had a good collect on the total match points. So it was quite a frustrating game, that whole game, and I actually backed the Pies to win by 25 plus. So it was a frustrating punting game, that's for sure. But they're a pretty dull game to watch. A big, I think it will. The ruck battle will be really important. I totally agree with you, George. Is Jackson? They've just got he's got a ruck solo. He's not a forward. The other thing that I thought about Jackson that made me question his footy IQ a little bit. And this goes back to my sort of comment just then about whether they're drilled, they have a message each game. And this game against Collingwood, it was like they were so quick to handball release. And Jackson, I don't know if you watched the game, George, but Jackson, he's brilliant. For a big fella, he's brilliant at getting the footy and moving through. He's like a sort of big midfielder. At least 4 times, he was fantastic in winning the ball and then just handballed to a stationary teammate who immediately got tackled. He did it at least 4 times. And I was, it was really just poor IQ footy.
But it seems to be a coaching instruction from, it wasn't just Jackson. It was.
No, that's right. That's what I mean. It's like they've got this instruction in their head and so, okay, we've got to do what the coach did. And it was so noticeable. They were looking to give off handballs the whole match. And as I said, they're a high handball team anyway. And so I think Fredericks is a pretty big out and, it's a perfect conditions for us. I think we'll win and I think we'll win pretty handily. And, then we can, we've got a good break, 7 days. They like going to the Alice and we've got under Goody a phenomenal record travelling. It's a pity it's a home game in the sense, but they've got to travel too. It's probably as tricky or if not trickier to get to Alice Springs from Perth, isn't it? You'd have to fly into Adelaide and then fly or do they have direct flights?
They probably have a charter for that one.
Right. So I don't know if Channel 7 are doing the promotion they did a few years ago, the heart of the thing. I don't think they're pouring the money into it, but I love the Alice game and I'm really pleased that the weather's going to be nice because the ground looks awesome when the weather's good. And one of my favourite games in recent years was the shellacking we gave the Crows that year, a few years back.
Size of the ground, it's 168 by 132. So the MCG's 173 by 148. So it's 5 metres shorter and 14 metres narrower. But the comparison, I guess, if you want to compare to Geelong's ground, is it's 2 metres shorter than Geelong's, but it's 17 metres wider than Geelong's.
So relatively wide, but. So they will look they like to really stretch the ground wide. The difference is why I think our model, like I said before, is we are using lots of uncontested kicks when we're playing well and using transition, but we look to go forward with those kicks. We're not dumping too many wide and Freo do, in my view, too much of that. It's just it just allows zone defences to get set up ahead of the ball.
Anything else, George?
Nothing else here.
All right, so let's leave it there for tonight. We're going to be back next week. If you want to listen to the show live, please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. And thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcast. Thank you, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃. Thank you to our voicemailer, Salty. And thank you to our callers, Noah and Enzo. And as always, your questions, comments do form an integral part of the show. So thank you to the posters who submitted their questions and comments. Thank you to Smurf, Mandy Lorian, Red Jacket, Travie14, D Minion, Red and Bluebeard, Doug Reamer, Wells11, Witch's Hat, Wodger the First, Singer, Bigfoot, Radish D, Lazy, Lefty, and Pingo. And also thank you to who was it? Swooper in the chat room who provided a question. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and B-Man, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. And don't forget, leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from. We'll read it out on next week's show. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.